Orden Ogan's fourth album, 2015, Ravenhead, sees the band refining their sound a little bit. They seem to focus a little bit more on the choruses on this album than on previous. They also go for a bit of a darker tone on this album, which is a nice shift for the band. As most power metal is very bright and upbeat, it's kind of a nice change. Now, the true masters of this style would mix songs with brighter tones with songs with darker tones to help give a variety of feelings throughout an album, but that's neither here nor there. It is a nice change and something different for the band. The production on this album is mostly typical power metal, although, like I said, there's a darker tone and it's a little bit heavier. Without wasting any more time, let's get into this track by track. The album opens with an intro, which is pointless. At this point, intro tracks have become a pet peeve of mine. I don't like them. All they do is ruin the first song when you start with the actual track and it seems like part of it's cut off because part of it's the intro track. Well, if it's part of the same song, why didn't you make it the same song? I'm really sick of bands doing this in modern metal. It's something that's been going on for a long time now, and I really could do without it. And then we get into the first actual song, which thankfully I don't have that issue here. The title track, Ravenhead, and this song actually does start on its own, so thankfully the intro doesn't cause an issue here. This is a pretty good song. It's a bit flawed, but I do really like this one a lot. There's some good guitar riffs going on. It's a nice up-tempo pacing. Like I mentioned, there's a darker mood to it. I like the kind of sinister way the singer is singing the verses of the song. The chorus is fairly catchy. It's serviceable. I like it well enough. It's nothing like what we'd get on the next album, Gunman, but it's still enjoyable. So they go verse, chorus, and then you get the solo, which is fine for what it is. The problem I have here is once the solo ends, the song keeps going for about a minute where nothing is happening, but they're playing the same riff over and over again. And there are a few things that change throughout this bit, but not very much. And like I said, this goes on for a minute before they go back into the third verse, and I'm not sure why the fuck that section is in this song. It doesn't really ruin the song for me. Usually when I'm listening to music, I'm either at work or doing something anyway, so I hardly notice it, but it's still there and I can't help but wonder why. All they had to do was continue that solo going throughout this minute of nothing, and that could have fixed the problem right there. Or done something else. Hell, even done a keyboard solo if they wanted to. Whatever, just something musical going in there. Still, this is a really good song. I like it quite a bit. It could be my favorite song on the album, actually. Next, we have the song Fever, and I like this track. However, it feels a little bit like a mess. So the song starts off with the chorus. It's a little bit more toned down version of the chorus. The chorus for this song has a lot of backing vocals. It's kind of bombastic. I didn't talk about this in the first track, but they do that in the first track, but on that song, it's a little bit more toned down than it is on this song, or than it would be on the follow-up album, which I've already reviewed. We would get a fairly up-tempo verse with some pretty good guitar riffs in the intro and verse. I definitely like the riffs better in this band than in a lot of power metal. I noticed a lot of power metal does the same guitar riff and the same drum beat over and over again. Hammerfall, Dragon Force. So it's nice to hear a band that can put together some decent guitar riffs, and they got a really nice tone to them. The vocals are again solid in the verses, and then we get that chorus, which is pretty damn catchy. After the first chorus, the song goes into a solo, and it's fine. It's nothing spectacular, but it's fine, I guess. A little short. And then they go into the second verse, which is very slowed down after a section with some guitar riffs, and it feels like the song is ending. They go into this verse, and then they have another brief instrumental section before going into that last chorus. Something about the way this is put together just doesn't flow right to me. I can't put my finger on it. It just feels like after that solo, I'm expecting the last chorus in the song to end. Not that I mind a verse being in there, it's just usually I'm used to verse, chorus, and I'm okay with the band playing with the song structure and trying to do something different, but here it seems like they're kind of doing the same thing, but just taking out a second verse and chorus. I don't know, it just doesn't feel quite right to me. I still like this track, but it feels like it could have been refined a little bit more, especially if they were going for a different formula with this track. Next we have the song The Lake, and this one has a pretty decent guitar riff at the start. It's got this unique little, I'm going to call it a twinge because I can't think of what else to call it, and that guitar riff, which sounds pretty cool. And the song kind of builds and goes into the main verse, which the first verse is pretty slow paced to start, and it has this guitar riff playing, and it reminds me of power metal meets maybe nu metal of all things, which could sound bad, but it works and gives this band a bit of a unique sound here. I really like this first part of the first verse. It's a bit slowed down, it's got its own unique sound to it, and I really like the guitar tone on this track. The heaviness really comes through here. And I feel like this was touching on something that could be unique and interesting. Unfortunately, once the song starts building towards the first chorus, the song goes into typical fast-paced power metal with a drum beat that, while not exactly that drum beat I don't like in power metal, is very, very similar to that drum beat that I don't like in typical power metal. And that's pretty sad. And then they go into the chorus, which again is not awful by any means, but it doesn't really do anything all that special. It's serviceable, I guess, but again, it sounds like typical power metal. One of the things I like about this band is that while being a power metal band, they tend to put their own spin on the genre, which makes them a little bit more interesting. But this song really feels like wasted potential because I really feel like they had something with this slow, groovy thing they had going on, and then they just, let's go into typical power metal again. And then there's a solo. It's played in the same style as the two previous tracks. It's fast-paced. It's too short, nothing really memorable about it. This song is okay, but man, do I think it could have been something if they had really fleshed out their ideas here, which pretty much describes how I feel about this album. Evil Lies in Every Man starts off with a voice singing the chorus that kind of has this horror vibe to it. The song itself doesn't, but this opening vocal delivery reminds me a lot of a voice that I heard in some horror movie a long time ago, which is just kind of odd. I don't really think it serves any purpose, and I think they could have just gone into the song and not done this. This song is going to get really repetitive. So there's some pretty cool guitar riffs going on throughout the intro. Again, we've got a really nice guitar tone here. Some of the guitar riffs remind me a little bit of Pantera's Revolution Is My Name. Not quite done to that level, but still pretty cool nonetheless. And then they get to the main verse, which starts off slower but picks up as the verse goes on. I'm not sure why, but I'm not really feeling the vocals in this track. I don't feel like they fit the aggressive nature of some of these guitar riffs. The vocals during these verses remind me a lot of a song off of their next album. I think it's Vampire and Ghost Town. But that song was done a whole lot better than this one, and those verses still managed to be really catchy. And these vocals aren't bad by any means, but it does kind of ruin a little bit of the vibe that I feel like the guitar riffs were going for. I feel like maybe you should have been a little bit more aggressive in the verses. Then we get to the chorus, which the melody, while repetitive, isn't awful and could work, but oh man, the repetition. It's evil lies in every man. I forget what the next line is. I think something about a lion's den or something, but I can't remember. And then evil lies with every man. Can you hope to understand this? And the this is just kind of thrown on as they wanted to rhyme with evil lies in every man. And it's so bloody repetitive. I can't get into it. And then they go into another verse and chorus, and then we get this instrumental section where we get some guitar riffs which sound kind of cool. And another guitar riffing section with some acoustic guitars played over it. Again, doesn't sound bad, but can we get a solo? They do finally go into a lead guitar lick. I wouldn't call that part a solo. That eventually goes into, I guess, what you could call a solo. But during this section, you have the backing vocals singing Evil Lies in Every Man. Are you kidding me? We already get this a lot in the chorus. Do we need this during the solo? It's not quite infuriating, but it's still pretty annoying, and there are definitely good aspects of this song. I wouldn't fault anybody for liking this track, but I don't know, for me it's a filler track that could have been a lot better. Here at the End of the World is a little bit more of a complete song than we've had in the last couple of tracks. This song has more of a groovy pace to it. I've definitely heard something like this before, but the band does put their own spin on things. It's more of an upper mid-tempo track. Something about the chorus kind of bugs me a little bit, and I'm not quite sure what it is. It might be the melody, just a little bit. It's not awful, but it definitely feels like there's a little bit of power metal cheese thrown in there. The solo is forgettable and too short. They basically just shred for about 10 to 15 seconds and then go into another extended section of nothing but guitar riffs before the instrumental break slows down a little bit before the final chorus. This is an okay track. I definitely like it better than the two previous songs we've had, but I really wish they had some awesome guitar solos on here and actually let them extend out to what would be a proper length rather than just throwing them in because they feel like they need a solo. A Reason to Give is next, and this is one of my favorite tracks on the album. However, it's desperately begging for a good guitar solo. So the first verse and chorus, the song is acoustic, and I really like the melodies on this track. I feel like the chorus is a little bit more subtle, a little bit less bombastic than a lot of this band's choruses are. And I really love the playing. I love the atmosphere for this track. It reminds me a little bit of medieval mixed with the Western theme they would go with for the next album. And I really like this acoustic section just because it offers something different for this album. The chorus does feel like it overstays its welcome a little bit. I feel like it could have been a little shorter, but that's a minor nitpick. I don't really mind that too much. When the second verse kicks in, the whole band comes in and the song is a lot heavier from there on out. This part works well too. I was really digging the acoustic vibes, but this section still works really well, and I really like the vocals during this second verse. And again, we get the same chorus, which, while good, still has that same issue. Then we go into a brief acoustic section with some drums playing over it to start the instrumental break, and then the song kicks in with just some guitar riffs and a guitar lick that plays over it, and you've got some backing vocals over it, not really singing anything, just humming a melody. And this section here, I can't help but wonder why they did not put a good guitar solo in here. This song is begging for it. It needs it, and just for whatever reason they didn't do it, and then the song just ends abruptly. It's a cool track, I like it, but again, it's something that I felt could have been better. Deaf Among the Blind is probably the fastest song on the album. It does venture a little bit more into typical power metal territory with that drum beat and some of the guitar riffs, but even here I still feel like they put their own spin on it. I don't get nauseated whenever I hear this. And I've ripped on power metal a lot. That's because a lot of it just sounds the same. But as I said, I feel like here this band still puts their own spin on it, so I can still listen to it. This is one of my favorite tracks on the album, actually. The verses don't do a whole lot for me. They're not bad. They're certainly serviceable. But what really gets me is that super catchy chorus. The solo might be the longest solo we've had so far on the album. It still doesn't do a whole lot for me, but at least it's something a little bit more extended, certainly more than what we've had in the last several tracks. And I really like when the song slows down and gets real quiet, and you hear a little bit of the melody to the chorus being played before the song kicks back in with the chorus to end this track. This is definitely one of the most complete tracks on here, and I don't really have any complaints about it. The solo could be a little bit better, but that's a minor nitpick. Otherwise, I think this song is actually really good. Sorrow Is Your Tale is the next track, and I really like the drum beat that starts off this song. It has a nice build to the song actually kicking in, and it's super catchy. I think part of the reason I like this drum beat so much is it also reminds me a lot of a Saxon song. I want to say it's either called Gates of Avalon or Halls of Avalon. It's something off of their 2011 album, but I can't remember the full name to it. The song kicks in and it has a nice groove to it. A variation of this same drum beat plays throughout the track, so that's kind of nice. It does have a different pacing for the band, again upper mid-tempo, which they've done, but it still has its own feel to it. The chorus is pretty catchy, and overall I like the vibe of this track. The solo, again, is not anything special. I've come to not really expect a good solo on this album at this point, but at least it's just repeating a few different melodies. It's not just pointless shredding, and it does last a little bit longer than some of the other ones that we've had, so I do appreciate that. Overall, I would say this is another good track, and we've had a few in a row now, which is nice. So, time to ruin that. With the next track, which is just a 2-minute instrumental. Doesn't really serve a purpose, I guess it's more of an interlude. The name is something like Of Grief and Chains, or something like that. Not a bad name for a track, but kind of wasted on just a pointless interlude. Too Soon ends the album with a whimper. I don't like this song. It's mostly drum and keyboard based, and it does have a kind of cool atmosphere to it. But other than that, there's not really much to this song. I really don't like the melody in the chorus, and the song itself just doesn't really go anywhere. I'm not a huge fan of keyboard-based songs. There are exceptions to this, of course, but this not being one of them. There is a kind of cool guitar melody that plays towards the end of the song, but it never really goes anywhere from there, and I just find this to be a really weak way to end the album. So Ravenhead ends up being an album, 11 tracks, 2 of them are pointless instrumental tracks, 1 track I don't like. That still leaves 8 tracks that are still range from okay to good. I'd say I like 5 songs on this album, and then 3 more I find listenable. So that's not too bad, especially for today's standards. This album ends up being a fairly decent album with some flaws, but I feel like it could have been really good with some fine tuning to what they were doing here and some good guitar solos.